If your voice is getting tired surprisingly quickly, you're definitely not alone. As I like to say, you're in quite a large club. Maybe you finish rehearsal and your voice feels pretty cooked. Maybe you teach for a few hours and speaking starts to feel harder. Maybe you're singing for 20 minutes and start wondering where your voice went. Or maybe the thing that really frustrates you is that someone else seems to be able to sing all day while you're already feeling really tired and fatigued. If any of that sounds familiar, here is some good news for you. Most vocal fatigue is not a sign that your voice is weak. And most vocal fatigue is not a sign that you're broken or anything's wrong. Now, if you suspect something's up, it's always good to go see a qualified laryngologist, ENT, get a stroboscopic examination, get a camera down there and take a look, because really we're not able to fully diagnose the health of a vocal instrument without visual imaging. But there are a lot of things that we can do before we have to make an appointment with an ENT. So in fact, vocal fatigue is often really important information. It's your voice trying to tell you something about efficiency. And today I want to show you some of the most common reasons voices get tired and how to start understanding what your voice might be asking for. Hello there, if you're new here, my name is Dan Callaway. I teach musical theater voice and vocal pedagogy at Boston Conservatory at Berkeley, and I've spent more than 25 years performing professionally and more than 15 years helping singers build healthy, sustainable, coordinated voices, and I'm very glad you're here with me today. One of the biggest misconceptions about vocal fatigue is that we assume fatigue equals weakness. We think, and I hear this a lot, I need more stamina, I need stronger support, I need to build my endurance. Sometimes there can be some truth to that, but honestly, most of the time what I see is not a capacity problem or even, what someone would call a stamina problem. It is a compensation problem. It is a sustainability and balance problem. And this is one of the most important ideas I think I can give you about this. Most vocal fatigue is not coming from the thing that feels tired. It is often one part of the system that is trying to find balance and compensate for maybe another part of the system that's probably working a little too hard or doesn't understand how it can leverage its acoustic advantages to its greatest benefit. As you have heard me say before, the voice is not one thing. It is a family of systems. You have your skeleton, your body use, your breath, your vocal fold vibration, your vocal tract shaping, articulation, body use, coordination, artistry. When one system becomes inefficient, another system often jumps in to help. And that is generous of the body, but it can be very expensive. And effort, if not balanced, it can be very expensive. So let's look at some examples. If your throat feels tired after, say, 20 minutes of singing, if your speaking voice becomes raspy by the end of the day, or even maybe after an hour or two if you're doing public speaking or lecture teaching, if you're constantly clearing your throat, if you wake up sounding great but fade throughout the day, those are some clues. Those are clues, not definite pronouncements. They are clues. So the question isn't, what's wrong with me? The question is, what system is working harder than it needs to? What system is working harder than it needs to? So one of the biggest culprits I see is overbreathing. A lot of singers take a lot more air than they actually need. Then all that extra air has to go somewhere. So even feel what it feels like in your torso when you take a very large breath. The vocal folds have to manage. You feel there's pressure because I've taken a big breath. Yeah, you can feel the pressure underneath that. The vocal folds have to manage that. So the tongue starts helping. Here, go ahead and listen. Yeah. So the vocal folds, they have to manage that pressure. The tongue is starting to help, and the pharynx starts helping. There's constriction around the pharynx. The muscles around the larynx start helping. So everybody gets drafted into the particular project of managing that big breath. And before long, the whole system is working harder than necessary. Another common culprit is over-compression right here at the vocal fold level. A lot of singers feel like the voice originates right here. It's just, I call it body logic. The body perceive certain things and it thinks, oh, well, the voice starts here. And so it'll start to recruit lots of sort of like a command center mentality right around the throat. So they feel responsible for holding the sound together. They really think they can sort of muscularly bring those folds over and together. And you can do that. You can add muscle, but you can feel what that does. You can empathetically feel what happens when I'm muscularly willing my folds together. So people will feel responsible, like they're given directions from teachers like close the folds. We've got to work on your fold closure. And so the brain hears that. The nervous system says, okay, let me recruit some things to make that happen. So we feel like you have to maintain the sound, control the sound, manage the sound. And after an hour or two, that becomes rather exhausting and really unenjoyable. So the irony is that many highly efficient singers often report feeling less effort than they expected. Not more effort, less effort. I often use this term offensively easy. When you feel a really wonderfully balanced sound come through, it's pretty ridiculous. It's pretty wonderful. And also you might do a little survey of how hard you've been working and maybe have a little bit of anger and grief about how difficult it's been and how easy it can really feel. Another big culprit is resonance strategy. So this is something I see a lot. Sometimes the voice opens very wide. Sometimes people make a lot of space there with the back of the tongue kind of forward, so a really wide tube. Or sometimes that comes from an impulse to want to sound warm and friendly and approachable. So sometimes people start speaking with a sort of breathy, whispery quality, maybe a little airy. So that can be a little, maybe a little whispery, a little airy, maybe a little, it could be connected more or more vibrant. And that can actually become surprisingly what we would call expensive over time, particularly if you're doing it throughout the day. I think they've done studies where vocal folds after prolonged whispery speaking, there's more inflammation and redness around the folds. Which brings me to something quite important. Sometimes the problem isn't your singing voice. Sometimes, and in my life this is true, it is your speaking voice. You might spend 1 hour singing and 8 hours speaking. You might be teaching, you might be parenting, you might be on Zoom calls, you might work or be in a restaurant or any other loud place, coffee shops, meetings, just general life. So that math of speaking throughout your day really does matter and it adds up. I know in my experience, if I have a day of just teaching singing one-to-one at the conservatory, I may have 6 hours of voice lessons in a day, and my voice feels quite good at the end of a day of teaching singing because I'm making singing sounds all day. On my lecture class days, I really do feel it after about an hour, 50 minutes, especially if I'm delivering a lot of content as the speaker in that class that day. Speaking is more taxing for me than singing. And so that's something we have to really look at. So if your voice is feeling fatigued a lot of the time, really investigate your speaking voice. Investigate your whole vocal day. Tools that I like to explore there when it is the speaking voice, I like to just slow my speech down. I'm going to witness what's going on. Am I aware that breath is coming through these vibrating folds? Breath is the engine of my speaking voice. Am I exploring resonant strategies to make the speaking voice feel good? Am I speaking in a comfortable pitch zone? I can experiment with lowering the pitch. How low and comfortable can the pitch be? A lot of times when we can speak in a nice low frequency, that's less vibrations in the fold. So not that we're going to try to drag it below our range, but just in a nice, comfortable, low, even chesty range. That's often a really good indicator for speaking voice. Now I want to give you what I think is the most encouraging idea in this video. A lot of singers start treating the voice like a fuel tank. I've heard speech language pathologists give lectures and talk about, well, you start off with the vocal fuel tank is this high and then throughout the day you lose it, or that there's like a vocal clock, this idea of I only have this limited amount of voice today and I need to save it. I don't want to use it up. And certainly there are moments when vocal rest is important. We have to be smart. We have to be balanced. But healthy vibration is not the enemy. Healthy vibration is part of how the voice stays coordinated and whole and vibrant, part of how tissues stay responsive, part of how motor learning stays active. The voice is resilient. The voice is fragile. Both things are true. The goal isn't avoiding vibration. The goal is efficient, vibrant. Look at that, vibration. I like to think of vibration in the voice as regenerative, as healing, as as something that feels good, something that can feel good. So if your voice is getting tired quickly, here are a few places I would start investigating. First, how much air am I using? How much effort am I using? Where do I feel the sound originates? Do I feel like it's originating here in the throat? Do I see there's an energetic flow that creates vibration through the folds? Am I using my vocal tract efficiently? Am I leveraging acoustic factors that create a lot of bounce and vibrancy within the tract that gives my vocal folds efficiency to speak? And what is my speaking voice doing all day? What is my speaking day like? A lot of times we have to just make sure, am I being heard? Can the person hear me? Okay, that's enough volume. A lot of times we think that we have to talk louder than we really do, and that's just not true. So if the person can hear me and I'm communicating well, that's a nice volume, especially when we're in louder places. It's hard to tell. And most importantly, what system might be compensating for another system? So are the muscles around my larynx trying to compensate for a lot of breath pressure? Are my vocal folds trying to vibrate in the presence of an inefficient vocal tract? Do I have constriction going on sometimes in the pharynx? I know somebody who speaks with a lot of constriction in the pharynx. And all of this is very psychologically related. We make decisions that we don't even know we've made. I just read a beautiful article by a friend of mine talking about how he was made fun of when he was 12 years old, and how his body made decisions on how to hide, how to change things so that bullies would not come after him. And so his voice was trying to help him, but now in his adulthood, he's having to go back and track through and see where the body and its protective mechanisms has actually set up roadblocks for vocal expression. So these are things we really need to explore. It's really interesting to think, how is my voice showing up right now inside of my particular vocal identity? And how am I communicating with the world? And how is my voice showing up? So just be really curious about that and give yourself time and a lot of compassion as you explore it. I'm working on that myself. Yeah, and just even asking, again, what system might be compensating for another system? How are my systems coordinating? Okay, so if I'm pushing through a lot of breath, this is going to have to compensate. What if I ease up my breath? Now that I've made this more efficient, how does that affect the flow of my breath? So fatigue is going to be, often it is information. It is not limitation necessarily. Of course, if you feel like you need to go to see an ENT, a laryngologist, to get a good scope, to rule out any possibilities of pathology, it's really important to do. But other than that, ruling that out, there are ways that you can work to create efficiency, vibrancy, and a regenerative relationship with vibration in your voice. And once the systems start collaborating more efficiently, many singers discover that their voice lasts much longer than they thought possible. I know I've had moments where I felt like I was singing quite efficiently, and I would get to the end of a rehearsal day, I would be physically tired, I would need rest, but the voice felt quite good. So you have to be responsible, good nutrition, lots of hydration, all the things we know to do. But it really is possible for the voice to work in a really regenerative and balanced way that's enjoyable. If you'd like help understanding how all these systems work together, head over to my Work With Me page linked below. You'll find the free voice map framework, the voice map course, the resource library, and options for one-on-one work together. It is the entire ecosystem I use to help singers move from confusion to clarity. Confusion is very painful. I know the pain of confusion, so one of my privileges as a teacher is to lead you toward clarity. And one quick personal note, this video is being done summer of 2026. This August 5th through 7th, I'll be performing my new play, Train to Cleveland, with John Ruskin at the Circle and Star Theatre in Hampstead as part of the Camden Fringe Festival in London. If you're in the UK, Europe, or happen to be making a last-minute trip to London this summer, I would love to see you there. You will find information about that below as well. And remember, your voice is usually telling you something, so listen carefully. Stay curious. There is only one you. Somebody would love to hear the story only you can sing. Love much. Now go sing.